Wow, what a big topic, but one of my favorite topics in photography. And by the end of today, you'll have seen some mind-blowing pictures by a diverse group of men and women. And where to begin? In our course description, I tried to describe a class where we're going to take a look at serious photographers who are doing years-long bodies of work slowly in order to record changes in our world, mainly to try and halt those changes or remedy things that are going wrong. And along the way, I think we should define our terms. I mean, we should talk about the difference between photojournalism and documentary photography, and even fine art photography. Some of the photographers that we'll look at today regard themselves as artists. And so there are so many things to talk about, and I am always happy to have you chime in with your thoughts. We're going to see beautiful work today. We're going to see beautiful images of tragic things. So, how do we resolve that? And I might as well just begin by saying that we photographers are not so innocent. I thought just for fun, I'd remind us all that when it comes to bringing more things into the world, this is kind of a fun graph, which is totally outdated now in 2022, but it's just a fun example of starting off when photography was invented in 1826. All the photographs taken in history amounted to 1 billion in 1930. Now we're at over 380 billion. That's probably double now in the last 10 years. But notice how many of us, and I think you can relate, we've slowly put our film cameras on the closet shelf and continued on with iPhones and digital images. So, the invention of digital photography just quadrupled or more the amount of photographs being taken. And here's a fun exhibit that I visited up at Pier 29 or Pier 24, the photography gallery up in San Francisco. One photographer, a Dutch photographer, Eric Cassels, downloaded and printed every photograph that was uploaded to Flickr in just one day. This was quite an amazing exhibition of all the photographs that were uploaded just to Flickr. This doesn't include Facebook or Snapchat or any of the other services, for just one day, 24 hours. It gives you quite a glimpse of the amount of pictures that are being taken. Now, the good news is, we photographers are not so bad because none of these people printed their work. This Dutch photographer did, but photography isn't necessarily bringing literally a ton more paper litter into the world each day because so many people are now just showing their works digitally. So we're not quite as bad as this makes us out to be. But I thought it would be fun also to point out that we photographers are getting into more and more mischief now that everybody has a camera with them on their phone. Maybe nature will start taking some of us out with our cameras. Here's a very surreal picture taken in Asia back in 2013 during that typhoon. And all these people with their cell phones, want nothing more than to just stand in front of a tidal wave and get a good picture. So I think we're going to be losing a few photographers along the way. But let's talk about what we're going to look at today. There's photojournalism, and then there's also documentary photography, and then there's also fine art photography. What we'll see today kind of blurs the lines between these different categories. Personally, I would define photojournalism as people trying to tell the truth and they have only a few seconds to get that picture. Cartier-Bresson worked for Magnum. He was a photojournalist along with a world celebrated fine art photographer, but he coined that famous phrase, the decisive moment. And I think that photojournalists are working under a daily or hourly deadline to take a picture. And I'll give them the benefit of a doubt and say that they're trying to keep their own opinions out of the photograph and just show you what's happening. Documentary photographers, I would also say, are trying to be honest and tell the truth, keep their own selves out of the picture, their own opinions. But documentary photographers have much more time to complete a project. We're going to take a look at some documentary projects today that have been going on for years. So documentary, I think, differs from photojournalism in that documentary photographers just have a lot more time. Walker Evans, back during the Depression, was a documentary photographer, and he photographed the American Depression, for years. Then there are fine art photographers, and all bets are off. All's fair in love, war, and art, I would say. So we're going to see a sprinkling of fine art photography today, where opinions are allowed. You can express an opinion in fine art photography, but I think there's a way to tell the truth and express your opinion. And W. Gene Smith, one of America's great photojournalists, said, "Let truth be my bias." He's the one that took those powerful pictures of Tomoko, that Japanese girl in her bath in Minamata. They're just painfully, religiously magnificent black and white pictures, W. Gene Smith. You've all seen that famous Tomoko in her bath. Her mom's holding this 20 or so year old young woman in a bath who was born with birth defects because of a chemical company in Japan sending mercury into the ocean, and then the fishing village ate the mercury. But anyway, that was an honest picture, but it also served to just convict the heck out of that Chiso Japanese company. So that's my long-winded explanation of different approaches to photography. And some other terms that we should keep in mind today, and I'm going to demonstrate this in just a minute. There's a great term that photojournalists are aware of, and it's the bane of their existence. If there were a hurricane in Florida and we became just avalanched with thousands of sad and tragic pictures of houses torn to pieces, after you've seen about your 15th one, I think the human body begins to just get paralyzed, or we go numb, which is the wrong feeling we should have. But after more and more and more and more, especially tragic, mentally challenging images, we just get tired out and we go numb. And I was talking about this with Roger Lukenbach, and he used a beautiful word. The word inured is such a fantastic single word. He said, yes, we become inured to things that are unpleasant. So here's a great example of that. Here's something, I just picked something that happened in the last couple of weeks. Here's a headline we've all seen. After you see pictures like this, pictures like this, pictures like this, the human mind can only hold and comprehend so much before we begin to fade out. So many of the photographers that we're going to see today all fear the fact that they might hit us so powerfully that we just have to turn off. It's probably a human safety mechanism, so we're just not overwhelmed. And this class is not about bringing us down, which can be very easily done with these kind of standalone images. I mean, this is just tragically painful. It's so painful, I was suspicious it was photoshopped, but this did come from the World Wildlife Federation top photographs of 2013. Tragic, tragic, tragic pictures. Just terrible, 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 terrible about things in the ocean, litter. But, we're not here to just weep over these very unfortunately abundant, sad images. I want to show you bodies of work done by people who are not trying to to make us weep, but they're trying to make us act. So they take a longer term view than these sharp, piercing, single standalone tragic images. And of course, um, you know, unfortunately, I didn't have to search very far for tragic current news. Lake Mead, we're running out of water here in the West. Here's a boat that had sunk years ago and settled into the mud, and now it stands upright as this eerie statue. The topic of water in the West is a long term. This could be rather than photojournalism, I'd say this is more documentary. There's no decisive moment happening in this image about the Colorado River running out of water. Or, a few months ago, Yellowstone had so much rain, all their roads washed out, mudslides. So you see in this New York Times article, they're mentioning a word that is going to be featured in much of the work today, climate change. Okay, let's cheer up if possible. And let's rewind a little bit and start back in the 19th century and take a look at photographers who might have had a hint. And it's always hard to do during our own time because, right now is our reality. It's hard to think about what our work would be like 50 years from now, or in this case, 120 years from now. But Francis Frith was an Englishman who set sail in the 1850s, and he documented the Middle East. Now, I'd like to think that he did that knowing that long after he passed away, his images would be valuable to us. But probably more to the point, it was a business. He opened up the Frith Company, and he traveled the world. He went to exotic places like Egypt, to the pyramids, knowing that all of his neighbors back in England would never be able to set foot in this exotic place, which in those days was even harder to get to than it is today. So he took these pictures really for profit, but we're so glad he did because we can now compare them to what happened years later. This is about 120 years later, and I had a chance to wander around here. And you can see how the Sphinx has been excavated by archaeologists. They've cleared all the sand away, versus what Frith shows us, which is probably more accurate about how the desert sands had piled up onto the Sphinx over a couple thousand years. So we really benefit from these early documentary photographs. Here's just another example. Timothy O'Sullivan was a photographer on these expeditionary groups that would go across America, usually with cavalry, and they'd have a naturalist and biologist, and they'd bring along a photographer. They're really exploring the West technically and scientifically for the first time. So here's Timothy O'Sullivan taking a picture of Pyramid Lake in 1867, which was his reality. We're glad he did, because Pyramid Lake looks very different now. And this was taken by a photographer named Mark Klett, K-L-E-T-T, teaches at Arizona State University, really a prominent photographer in landscape photography for the past 30 years. But he started a group called the Rephotographic Survey, which would go out, they would hold a photograph in their hands by O'Sullivan and many other photographers. And they would very scientifically try to stand, if possible, and it's not always possible, but they tried to put their tripod down exactly, let's say, on the same 3-foot circle that Timothy O'Sullivan did. And I'll show you how super helpful it is to have the work of these early photographers. And if you look at these really carefully, Mark Klett really tried to put his tripod in the exact same place. And again, because of rock erosion and other reasons, you can't always do it exactly, but these are very fascinating and pretty telling about which direction we're going here. But really, let's take a look at let's start our tour of individual photographers. You've got to give William Henry Jackson a lot of credit. He may not have intentionally set out to do this, but he joined an expedition in the 1870s, the Hayden expedition. And here is William Henry Jackson at a young age with his trusty companion. Nowadays, we might use a Toyota or a Ford or some other car to lug our equipment, but this was all that was possible in these days. This is his faithful companion, Hypo, and I should start offering prize money. Why do you think he named his mule Hypo? What does that have to do with anything? All you photo experts, you can unmute or press the space bar and win some money. People, Susan, you know this. Mark knows this. Oh, you're so bashful. Or you know how to unmute yourself. Lucky for me. But hypo, as you all know, is another term for fixer in the darkroom. You put your prints in the developer, the stop path, the fixer. So we say, put your prints in the hypo. So that's a cute name for his faithful companion, who Jackson hopes will not take a misstep and fall on the rocks and break all his glass plate negatives that are in this box over here. This is probably 2 weeks worth of photographs, maybe 20 sheets of glass plates that he's going to carefully try and bring home. But you can see, here's a hint that when he traveled through Yellowstone in the early 1870s, he took pictures. He was the first to make pictures that documented Yellowstone. And Jackson's pictures were sent to senators in Washington, very sympathetic senators. And, I give our government a lot of credit because the senators got together looking at these magical images, like something that shoots water out of the ground, regularly on the hour, so faithfully. I don't know what we should call this, like old predictable, And here's a hint of somebody we're going to take a look at in a minute. Ansel Adams, you got to give him a lot of credit. But anyway, William Henry Jackson's pictures of these really surreal places in Wyoming were sent to Washington, and Congress passed a law protecting Yellowstone, as you all know, as America's first national park in the 1870s. And again, I respect that because no McDonald's had been built by then, no cars had been built by then, tourist hotels have not been built in front of Old Faithful, at that time. So it was, I might be wrong, the lodge might have been there long ago, so I don't want to misstep, but certainly no paved roads, no cars, no commerce. So it's amazing for our government to say, well, none of that has been invented yet. There's no pressure on these places. They're hard to get to, hard to find, but let's just protect them anyway. Let's just say that nobody can drive some future truck, right up to the edge of this. So when your roommate asks you, what has photography ever done for anyone? Tell them, well, it helped start America's national park system with Yellowstone in the 1870s because of photographs. So these are the kind of scenes that William Henry Jackson saw, but he also saw things like this. Human critters begin to invade these really fragile, magical places. This guy looks like he's trying to climb this with a pickaxe or something, or ice axe. This is actually the artist Moran, who was there on the expedition. But Jackson begins to see people trampling these places. Here's a photo not by William Henry Jackson, but you can see, what's beginning to happen when we love a place to death. So thanks to Jackson, Yellowstone became our first national park. And his images stand today as, fantastic historic records. So today's topic is photographers who photograph our fragile earth. And William Henry Jackson is front row center as someone who saw the importance of, he saw the special qualities and the fragile qualities and made pictures. And then the senators made it happen. If you're going to enact a first national park, you got to have the first park ranger. So this rugged guy, Harry Yount, became our first U.S. park ranger. Look at this guy. A guy who didn't mind being alone and never bathing. First ranger. And William Henry Jackson also visited Yosemite in the 1890s, and he was just a wild man. Look at him here. I mean, this looks like Photoshop too, but he really did teeter out on the edge there in Yosemite. I mean, I don't know if you could even pay any of us to do this with his front tripod leg, like right on the edge of the diving board, as I say. Here he is in older age. He was born in 1843. He lived, imagine what this man experienced. He was born in the 1840s, fought in the Civil War, lived to see the first aeroplane in the sky, lived to see the first train, all these inventions. You just couldn't, this guy just could not go to heaven until 1942. Born in 1843, died 1942 at 99. Here's a picture I took on the street of San Francisco. This is not where he died, but he fell through a grate in a sidewalk in 1942 and died. So one of my terrible jokes is that, you know, he did so many good things for nature that nature could not do him in, but the city could get him. The guy falls through a sidewalk grating in 1942. And he's very, very, very proudly buried in the Civil War cemetery in Arlington. I'm sure not too many of these graves here have any dates in the 1900s, but and certainly his is one of the very few that has a Civil War soldier buried there who died in 1942. Well, I mentioned Ansel. You got to love this guy. Everybody loves Ansel. Traveling the America, I was going to say the Southwest, but he certainly took pictures farther afield than that with his great international harvester with his tripod mounted. But I'm going to just show you only a few of his pictures because we're all familiar with Ansel. But, you know, on today's topic of photographers who love the earth, who love our world, this guy is right front row center. At age 14, his parents took him to Yosemite with a little box brownie camera. Look at little Ansel Adams here. And look at Ansel's early photographs. He became a better printer, don't you think? But here's his cute handwritten board with his first box brownie pictures that he had to send the roll of film back to Kodak, and he got his prints back. So you see his first love. And here is a scruffy and smelly Ansel Adams to just remind you what a kindred spirit he was to this scruffy guy. And the two of them, Ansel rephotographed many of Jackson's places in his own way. But, you know, think about the different styles we're going to see today and think about the different strategies. We're going to see photographs today that are fairly accusatory, very opinionated photographs, and rightly so. We're going to see photographs of things going wrong in our world. But Ansel chose the approach to show us our world so beautifully, that we would want to protect it. You know, it's an interesting approach. I mean, he often shows us our world even more beautiful than it really is, because he photographs in black and white, which abstracts the world. It takes one step back from the color world by abstracting it into black and white. And also with his masterly darkroom skills, often the world in his prints is even more dramatic and more spiritual and sacred than reality. So I think what he's trying to do is dialing up the volume, the aesthetic volume, to just tell us to make us appreciate how special our surroundings are. Here's Mount McKinley when he photographed it, Mount Denali now. And you've seen these. I want to show you this Mount Williamson, one of Ansell's very famous pictures. But another reason you got to love this guy, he always picked the right side. You know, he's protecting the environment, former president of the Sierra Club. But this is a special feature of Ansell that many people don't realize. We just think of him as a landscape photographer. But the real title of this is called Mount Williamson from Manzanar. And this is during the 1940s. And the Manzanar relocation camp, where all the Japanese Americans, I shouldn't say all, but many of them were inhabiting. Ansell was invited to photograph Manzanar and the people, and he took beautiful, beautiful pictures of the American Japanese Americans that were there, people that were born in America, but they were Japanese, and so it's World War II, and we can't trust them. And you know all the stories of the camps, but I just want you to know that, you know, the real title of this is Mount Williamson from Manzanar. So there's another part of Ansell's humanity. It was wanting to photograph these beautiful Japanese Americans and honor them. And he did a book called Manzanar, Born Free and Equal, which was published and totally unpopular in those days. Thank you, Ansell. Every now and then he did give us a hint about where his opinion was. This is in Long Beach, very witty photograph. Great example of depth of field. You know, if you were teaching a photography class and you wanted a classic picture to describe foreground and background, this is such a smart idea for Ansell to be in a cemetery in Long Beach. And luckily the oil derricks were just near the cemetery. And so every day Ansell would sit down and write a letter. This is even pre-internet, pre-email. So he'd type a letter and send it off to presidents of the United States, congressmen, asking them to protect our land. Here's a picture of Ansell Adams meeting with Gerald Ford when Ford was president. Here is Ansell with his crooked nose alongside you-know-who when he was president. Ansell was brought to the White House on several occasions and given awards. And so on this occasion, Ansell was the official White House photographer for Jimmy Carter and his wife to do the presidential portrait. So thank you, Ansell. You could see him in his study almost every day writing letters and pressing, protecting the environment. When he was part of the Sierra Club, he led a successful challenge against building a road across Lake Tahoe, cutting the corner at Emerald Bay, if that rings a bell. You know, currently you can drive around Lake Tahoe, but it's pretty circuitous. And, you know, any old reasonable, you know, builder would think, let's just cut this corner. We'll just build a girder bridge right across this most beautiful bay, the southwest corner of Lake Tahoe, Emerald Bay. Let's just put a high road over that. People can still paddle their boats under there. So Ansell knew that was an atrocity. So that's just one of the many things he did. And his arch enemy back in those days, in the Reagan era, the Secretary of the Interior was, and I should offer a prize for this. Who was Ansell's arch enemy? He was called an anti-ecologist, the Secretary of the Interior, James Watt. And Ansell here is just proud as he can be. Not that he had much to do with this, but James Watt had to step down as that Secretary of the Interior. You can see, controversial. Okay, now, how's everybody doing? Now, that was just the introduction, but I really had to give credit to William Henry Jackson Ansel for knowing that our planet might not have been under pressure at that point, but they knew that we had better protect it from then on. Nick Brandt, unbelievably prolific, unbelievably powerful. This is his early philosophy, calling his images romantic and that they're an elegy. Through the years, and I'll take a look at some of his books along the way. Through the years, he's tightened the screws down and he's becoming more activist than just being romantic. But he made a household name for himself with these spectacular black and white photographs of Africa, which you could say are romantic. And we don't see quite the hint of this being an endangered species yet. I mean, we don't see that in his photographs. They're just these like spiritual, fantastic images of African animals. He was originally a video director, and he was chosen by Michael Jackson to accompany Jackson to Africa to shoot some music videos. And my suspicion is that Nick made a ton of money back in those days. And he learned skills about directing, because as we move through his work, you're going to see him taking on working with 50 people, 100 people, directing people. So his still images are very much like filmmaking in terms of having to work with other people. I and many of you here today are still photographers because we don't want to work with anybody. Being a still photographer is much more of a solitary medium. So these are some of Nick's early works, and he's done a number of books. When I was director at CPA, I discussed having him come up for a solo exhibition, and frankly, we decided that our gallery walls weren't big enough, unfortunately, but we became friends, and I had a chance to visit his home, and he had this image on his wall, which is about 8 feet tall. He goes, "Oh, that's Greg. He's dead now. The poachers got him." So I mean, it's just unbelievably tragic. Not that you could always see it in these images, but over time, he's going to dial up the volume and become more activist, as we'll see. Here he is. And also, he's in this picture, I'm looking very carefully, and he's shooting a Pentax 6x7. He usually, until recently, he always shot film cameras, and he had to wait in Africa for days and days for these dramatic skies to appear. You'll notice in many of his photographs, there are these incredibly dramatic, brooding skies, which are not Photoshop. But even though he shot in film, he would scan the negatives, and he always printed digitally. But I mean, fantastically powerful images. And, not to be confused with many, many, many other travel photographs we've seen. There's something about these Nick Brandt photographs that are almost religious. There's a great example of his brooding skies. Take a look at the power of a caption. Look at this. Here's a beautiful picture. All's going well. All is going to go well forever, I imagine. Timeless picture. Here's the caption. The leading matriarch, the leading mother elephant killed by poachers. This beautiful, beautiful leader killed. So this is what's on Nick's mind. I mean, fantastically powerful images. And his book titles add up to a sentence. I'll give you an example of that. Super powerful, straight photographs, although he tampers a little more recently, which we'll see. Unbelievable. He puts his money where his mouth is. He wants to protect these rapidly vanishing species, and so he founded a company, and not a company, but an organization, a nonprofit called Big Life, I could have given away some prize money on that. Many of you know that Nick is associated with Big Life. What a great name. It's biglife.org. I'll show you his homepage in a minute. But he funds, he takes donations, and he donates much of the profits of his work to Big Life to fund what he calls rangers out on these preserves that will go out and try and stop poachers from shooting animals for their ivory. Powerful image. This is what one of his shows would look like. I mean, so powerful. You just have to sit down on these sofas. These things are huge, 6 feet wide in some instances. Beautiful portraits of these animals. Here he is. Some of these large ones have sold for $250,000 to the Getty Museum and others. And this is just as Ansel, made pictures of the land he loved and served in the Sierra Club, Nick makes really powerful images, but this is a huge part of his life, half of his life, trying to do something about what's happening in Africa. And let's take a look at another body of work. I mean, so prolific. Another book called Inherit the Dust, monumental undertaking. This is a great example of Nick being a director. Now, some of us here today, we know our Photoshop pretty well. So you would think, okay, Nick just took one of his pictures that he photographed and he just pasted it into this horrific dump, in Africa. But actually, this is a straight photograph. I mean, with a lot of dodging and burning and drama added. But this is a picture of a giant board, a giant print, digital print, mounted to a board propped up in this dump. And I mean, really, really powerful stuff about, where animals used to roam. This used to be a natural lair, and now they've been relegated to game refuges. And even then the poachers go on, because that's where all the lions and elephants are, with ivory and pelts. So even protected game preserves lose their animals all the time to poachers. Very powerful stuff. This is about maybe 12 feet wide. Amazingly, confrontational, forcing this marriage between a natural world and what we've done, and what we've done to him now. What is his world now, or her world? Very powerful stuff. Sometimes he kind of wittily fits the horizons together. He shows these all around the world. Sometimes in huge museums, he'll put a plexiglass box, a really beautiful, large plexiglass box out in the lobby, and it's just donations. After the museum goers have been blown away by these 12-foot wide photographs, if you want to do something about it, you can put $1 or 20, in this plexiglass box, and often there'll be $75,000 in that plexiglass box after 6 or 8 weeks of the show running. And here's another powerful image. I think this is Johannesburg, and he put one of his, you can see the scale, one of his giant murals under this freeway overpass. And I've heard Nick talk about this, and he said the only people looking at these animals are these little tiny African kids. And tragically, you'll see bottles here, but these are actually glue sniffers. These guys are sniffing glue, to just literally be taken away from where they are. If that's not enough, let's look at another body of work. It's getting more digital. He just finished this series which is a real departure. It's color photography. And I won't take your time to read this, but each image is a combination of two moments in time captured weeks apart. And again, I don't want you to take your time reading it, but he comes up with these pictures. I mean, are you kidding me? And this is two exposures. I mean, it's unbelievable, unbelievable. Let's take a look at how he does it. He sets up a camera, digital camera, a very expensive digital camera, protected from being bashed by a rhino. And he sets it down, bolts it down, and aims it at some place that might invite an animal to visit. And so now you've disturbed the landscape. You've put this metal object with machinery in it. So now you have to leave and give it 2 weeks before any animal would ever dare come near this camera. But over time, animals would visit, and a picture's made of an animal without any people. And then Nick will, be able to see probably remotely where the elephant is, and he'll see what picture he got of an elephant sipping at a pond. And then he can bring his extras in, the humans, to fill in, and he can place the humans in relation to the first picture. So it's really a double exposure, so to speak, or now that we have digital imaging, it's two exposures, and you make it happen in Photoshop, layers and all. So take a look at, the narratives that he's trying to tell. He gets the pictures of the elephants, and then he fills it in with people to, again, create a narrative about how we're in this together. We humans think that we can live without elephants. We can dispose of all living creatures except our own selves. But Nick is, showing this symbiosis that we have with the rest of the world. And the reason I said I think that Nick made a lot of money with Michael Jackson is that he'll put $1 million into this project. I mean, he's building these bridge, overpass structures that are really there in the scene. I think this is his beautiful Irish actress wife, Orla, who you've seen in some movies. She is usually on English TV in series, weekly series, and that's his wife. Anyway, massive undertakings. Frankly, I mean, I'm here to praise everything today, but I'm not sure. I don't know. Just personally, I'm not sure if these color ones are moving me to do anything, but feel free to disagree. I mean, these are, massive undertakings, super impressive, theatrical, but they are so surreal that, I mean, they're just so staged. You can see the artificial lighting. They're almost too overly dramatic. Nick has really changed from those early black and white images into now he's trying to tug on our heartstrings. These have an opinion to them. Now here's his most recent work, which you might like this even more. Some of these are mind-blowingly fantastic. And look how he's brought the volume down, way down, back to black and white. His latest book, The Day May Break. And these are straight photographs, so to speak. The people are there, the animals are there. The Hollywood fog machines are there, and the Hollywood, crew is there, which I'll show you. One person writes about this body of work. He calls Nick one of photography's great environmental champions. Channeling his outrage into quiet determination. Here's the last word is why I wanted you to see this quote. The result is a portrait of us all at a critical moment in the Anthropocene. Now, that's an interesting word. Not that it's been fully accepted by scientists yet, but I thought I would be a boring professor and throw a bunch of definitions on the screen, because the word Anthropocene is a word that should be rattling around in our minds through this whole two-part course. The Anthropocene is the latest period of time during which human activities have impacted the environment enough to constitute a distinct geological change. The pressures we exert on the planet have become so great that scientists are considering whether the Earth has entered an entirely new geological epoch. Instead of the Pleistocene age, dinosaur age and this and that, it's possible we humans have now made such an impact, we are causing a new change. We're the first people to live in an age defined by human choice, in which the dominant risk to our survival is ourselves. Probably true. If Putin does something wild and crazy, it's going to, and then we might do something wild and crazy, or at least we have to threaten to. I don't want to get into politics. You know what I'm talking about. Could certainly be a risk to our survival. I'm just ad-libbing here. But look at these somber images. These would be better if I didn't say a word, but good luck with that. Minor White used to show his photographs and have his students in a pitch black room and just take 5 minutes on each of his mystical photographs without saying anything. He'd like brainwash them. The great term is that Minor White created a lot of minor whites. And these, I think, are so spiritual and they're so quiet that I'm sorry I'm talking. But here's an example of what's happening behind the scenes. Interesting use of that light bulb. Amazingly powerful. Amazingly powerful. And this for me might, and I should ask all of you, to me, this might deliver the message that he was trying to deliver in those color images, which is that we're all in this together, by pairing just single 1, 2, or 3 people together with an animal that's really there. I am getting the idea that we're in this together. Any thoughts from any of you?
So, Brian, this is Anna Mae.
Anna,
Questioning, these are double exposures, right?
the animals are really there. These are real pictures. Straight.
How did that man turn his back on a rhino?
I think they're on a very tame preserve. Nick, at the beginning of his career, he got these pictures like nobody else got of like lions, like the wind blowing in a lion's mane. And this lion's like 10 feet away from him because Nick's inside of a Land Rover, with the window rolled down on a preserve where the animals are very tame.
Thank you.
Yeah. For a great example of that, look at I should include Peter Beard in this, maybe next week. Peter Beard in his day was so protective of animals and the environment, he'd go out and capture a poacher at gunpoint and take him back and lock him as prisoner in a room until the wardens could arrive. Anyway, Peter Beard had pet warthogs and all these animals would come onto Peter Beard's tent community. So it is possible that these are tame. Stunning photograph. Miraculous photograph. Got to take a lot of pictures to get this. And he's shooting digitally now. And he's got his crew and he's got his fog machines. But I mean, wow. A magnificent photograph. Hopefully, it'll cause us to act. He's trying as hard as he can in his own way. but he also runs Big Life, which is taking in many, many donations. So Nick, Nick gets it. He's asking the locals to pose for him, and he wants to compensate them. He wants to help their lives get better. So when he sells his prints, some of the proceeds will be evenly distributed. I love it, on a biannual basis, not just one time. He's going to try and help these people have better lives. This is just what you'd expect or hope him to say. Darn right, it's carbon neutral. And here's just an example of his website. You can see what some of the things they've done. They've got 2 planes, tracker dogs, patrol vehicles. All this costs so much money. Anyway, ponder it. We certainly give something each year, and we got a handwritten note back. If you wanted to own a Nick Brandt print, he'll make smaller size prints in large editions, and those proceeds of those go 100% to Big Life, and we certainly have one. Okay, note to self: if you're a photographer, never follow Nick Brandt in a slideshow. I mean, how can you compete with that? But here's a guy who can give it a good run for the money. Here's a very, very famous American photographer, still alive and well, Richard Misrak. Any thoughts on anything? I don't know about you, but I'm already overdosed and we haven't gotten going. But we have a half an hour still. Richard Misrak, look at this 8x10 Deardorff film camera. I mean, real old school. But the benefit of that is you get unbelievable resolution on an 8x10 film negative. It's 80 square inches, 8x10, 80 square inches of negative. So in 1979, Richard Misrak turned his camera towards the desert. He had done other bodies of work before then, but let's pick up with what's relevant for this class. He says, you look at a landscape, but it's not really landscape. It's a symbol for our country, a metaphor for our country. And so he takes that term cantos from poetry. A canto, one canto is a chapter of a longer poem. So you have the first canto, the second canto. I have notes on all these people. But take a look at how lucky Richard Misrak was to appear during these desert fires. He's so lucky that the fire department almost arrested him for starting these fires. Because, I mean, if you could light this, you got a fantastic photograph if you're willing to do that. And he did not light these. But they kind of followed him around. Like, how did a photographer get right here on the forefront of this fire, so quickly, and set up an 8x10 view camera? Very powerful stuff by Richard Misrak. And here you could say is a body of work that's critical of what we're doing to the land. Down in the Southwest, there's a bombing range down there. I mean, to this day, we got to practice our bombing somewhere. So you go to some desolate part of the Mojave Desert, and this is Bravo 20. Of course, it's totally chain linked off to any of us naively pitching a tent on the bombing range. But look at this, live rounds still in the ground. I mean, these are just fantastic images. And he did get access out there, but he has made these very powerful documentary, straight photographs of us kind of indicting ourselves, these terrible toxic pools of chemicals out there. Maybe when it rains, it brings these chemicals up. A little bit of bleak irony here, like just exactly why did the Air Force choose this particular object as something to just shoot the complete shit out of on bombing range, a school bus. A little weird, and that's exactly what Mizrak was picking up on. Now I am not going to say anything the least bit snippish here. I mean, these are some of the most powerful photographs you will ever see in your life. Words to have in mind: Goya, Picasso's Guernica. You think I'm kidding? Mizrak was barreling around the Nevada desert and came upon these pits of dead animals in the late 1980s. I think you can see the date. Mine's covered up. And these are sites of restricted military areas where they did atomic testing. And these sites did still have radiation. And I'll have my notes here. I won't take too much time on this, but in Nevada history, on March 24th, 1953, this is right after some atomic tests, 1953, the Bullock brothers were running 2,000 head of sheep across the Sand Springs Valley when they were exposed to extensive fallout from a dirty atomic test. Of course, this is all invisible. The cowboys and the sheep had no idea. Within a week, the mother sheep began dropping their lambs prematurely. They became stunted, woolless, legless, pot-bellied. Soon, full-grown sheep started dying in large numbers. Horses and cattle were found dead with beta radiation burns, almost 5,000 animals killed. Initial investigation by government experts indicated that radiation was the cause. However, when the Atomic Energy Commission recognized the potential economic and political liability, all reports and findings were immediately classified, and the explanation became a dry year and malnutrition were blamed. So, wow, once again, this should be complete silence. I mean, again, Goya. Think of Picasso's Guernica, that bull screaming. Wow. And these are 4 by 5 feet life-size head staring at you on the wall. Unbelievably powerful. I've been to lectures that Richard has given at which times one or two ranchers will step up and say, "You're full of baloney, go home with your commie radiation theories," because we're ranchers. Anybody who has 100 horses or 100 cows, guess what's going to eventually happen? To some of them, all of them, we're going to have deaths. So we haul them into a trailer and we take them to these pits, these community pits, and we burn them. And that's just life. That's the cycle of life. So there's no conspiracy going on. So I think today there are these dead animal pits. I mean, again, Mizrak photographed these in the 80s. Horses are dying, cows are dying on ranches. Ranchers are still doing this. So these don't necessarily have to be about atomic bomb tests, but they're incredibly powerful. And part of his Desert Canto series. Cheering up a little bit, Richard Mizrak was near the Salton Sea in the early 80s when the Salton Sea overflowed into these neighborhoods that were basically at sea level. And of course, the whole Salton Sea was a breach of the Colorado River, I think in the early, maybe the 1900s. And millions of gallons of water flowed into this impression south of Palm Springs and created the Salton Sea, an unnatural lake, which is still there. And Los Angeles is praying that it remains there so that it doesn't dry up and all their arsenic dust blows into Los Angeles. But anyway, here's one of Mizrak's surreal images of this sunken neighborhood in Salton Sea. He was at a place called Bombay Beach, which is the go-to place. If you're ever near the Salton Sea, you got to go to Bombay Beach. And what bar must you have a drink in? And we're not going anywhere until somebody answers that question. We're waiting. $1 million. The one bar on the Salton Sea on the east side is called the Ski Inn. And it's a fantastic place. There's about $10,000 bills with your girlfriends and boyfriends' names lining the ceilings and the wall. I saw Michelle's name in there more than once, I have to say. I can't hear anybody else's laughter, so I hope, sorry about that, Michelle. But anyway, here's a picture I took more recently. And that is exactly that trailer. That's this, that's this exact neighborhood. And it's amazing. You know, you learn something about planet Earth. The Earth will reclaim herself very quickly, very quickly. So this is that neighborhood slowly sinking into the Salton Sea. Got to go to Bombay Beach. It has become kind of an art installation place. A lot of Burning Man things go there to die. So it's a very kooky place, Bombay Beach on the east side. And while you're there, go to Salvation Mountain and Slab City. And Richard went to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina went through there, and he took pictures of words on people's homes, which are, you know, amazing. Amazing what one spray painted word or phrase will do to an image. This became a book. Good question. It's amazing what spray paint will do. Here he is, no more 8x10 Deardorff film camera. He's got this, you know, 100 megapixel Hasselblad nowadays. Mark knows I'm exaggerating the megapixels, but and his recent body of work, and then we'll carry on away from Richard Mizrak, but he has been photographing the border wall for many, many years. And so this becomes another chapter of his cantos, his desert cantos. And his pictures are pretty powerful. And you could say this is something we're doing to the land. I mean, it's becoming like a huge sculpture project, this running wall, running fence across the border. You can see the Mexico side, the US side. It's a very interesting project. Needless to say, it's certainly a controversial topic. You can see where it ends, you know, maybe construction stopped. And these were actually tests when the engineers were asked to build a wall. They submitted various solutions to that, which are now very surreal. I mean, this is kind of hilarious. If we thought this was the border wall, you know, it's kind of like a cartoon, but it was just a test. Anyway, so much to talk about, so much to talk about. Politics, so much about culture. And this is what an exhibition of that work would look like. This is at the San Jose Museum, and these are his large, huge, you know, 10-foot, 12-foot wide, 6-foot tall photographs of the wall would look like. And this was an exhibition of sculpture by another person. Guillermo Galindo made these objects out of refuse that was found by the wall that could be turned into musical instruments. So it's an interesting kind of photographic and sculptural exhibition. But we'll say goodbye to Richard Mizrak and say hello to someone who is a great friend to many of us, alive and well, Robert Dawson. Bob Dawson. I taught with Bob Dawson at San Jose State for probably 20 years, and he has retired and taken up several different projects. But let's take a look at what's very relevant to us from his background. Dawson is just perfect for this course, perfect for this course. And he's done several books. One book, Farewell, Promised Land. What a great title. What a fantastic picture. What a fantastic picture. The title is called Private Property, Lake Tahoe. Wow. I mean, Dawson saw this and said, I am stopping the car right here. You know, whoever peer this is acting like I own Lake Tahoe, or like, this is my Lake Tahoe. And the fact that this is like about 3 feet of water here, you know, I think, dude, I'm thinking we can go around your gate, you know. So the whole thing is just filled with so much irony, but it's also, you know, this took thousands of dollars to construct this. This guy's dead serious about ownership. So that's a conversation starter. Phenomenal straight photograph of Lake Berryessa. You know, when the lake gets to a certain height, this is a spillway. I don't know how he got there, and man, if I was in a boat, I'd be pedaling backwards as fast as I could. Fantastic picture by Bob Dawson. You know, he's a dead serious, straight photographer, very, very straight, very dry, but he lets us indict ourselves. You know, Nick being Nick Brandt, you know, being a former film director, just is tightening the screws down, raising the volume, but Dawson just sort of lets us hang ourselves with this corporate farm near Bakersfield. Look how they've plowed everything, but maybe by law they can't plow this tree. So, all right, we won't plow the damn tree. You know, we'll give it some ground. Fantastic photograph. This is where San Francisco gets much of its water. This is water being delivered to San Francisco from the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir over by Yosemite. Another powerful photograph by Dawson. A Delta farm on the Sacramento Delta when it flooded. This is a polluted river near the US-Mexico border near Calexico. And I had heard, I'll have to fact check this, but I'd heard that this is a river, a polluted river flowing into the US from Mexico. But some of us might think that all rivers flow in a certain direction, but this might be, I mean, you know, the irony might be, and this is just one interpretation, you know, we do a lot of manufacturing in Mexico for lower labor rates. And wouldn't it be ironic if the pollution that came from those factories came back to America? I mean, that's just a possible interpretation. Here he is in Iceland, you know, and I should have said that much of his interest has always been about water. He did a project called Water in the West, Bob Dawson. So you're going to see water in much of his work until more recently. Here's Mono Lake. And we Northern Californians are always a little tough on Southern Californians because a lot of this Mono Lake water is watering front lawns in Los Angeles. Here I am being a snooty Northern Californian. And another amazing straight black and white photograph by Dawson. Cracked mud. Okay. How are you doing? All right, fasten your seatbelts. There was a great show at CPA. Some of you might have attended when Helene Glick, my favorite curator, curated a beautiful show and wrote a beautiful essay. I want to give Helene Glick, who was also a curator at the Monterey Museum, a ton of credit for choosing these 4 artists. These are all about earth, air, fire, and water. And we'll take our last 10 minutes to zoom along. This guy deals with both earth and air and water. David Mizell, very lovable guy, lives in San Francisco, alive and well. And someone else who's done a whole bunch of different bodies of work, but relevant to us today. And this is all from that CPA show. Some of you might have seen the show. His were about 4 feet square, huge color prints. This is Owens Lake. And I want to be accurate about this. I got to find my, well, anyway, this is Owens Lake, which until 1913 was a real lake in Eastern California, on the eastern side of the Sierras. It's not in Nevada, it's in California. And then Los Angeles got the rights basically to drain it, to bring water to LA. And so David Mizell, oh, here we go. Here's the info I was looking for. And again, I hate to take your time, but just scan it. In 2004, local people realized that if you completely let this lake dry up and turn to dust, you're going to have all kinds of toxic, heavy metals blowing around. And to this day, Owens Lake bed is still the largest single source of dust pollution in the United States. And so David Mizell chartered an airplane and flew over Owens Lake and took these pictures, which are very perplexing. You know, if you loved abstract painting, you might want to purchase one of these before knowing what you're looking at, because these are really beautiful abstract artworks. But the tragedy is we're looking at a dry lake bed here that has a little bit of water in it, maybe rainwater. And again, you saw a court ruling that the lake is not allowed to go completely dry, so they put trickles of water in it. But this is this algae bloom. So these are at once beautiful abstractions and photographs, but at the same time, if you read the backstory, these are like photographs of something that should not exist. And yet they're, again, really beautiful abstractions, like whatever's going on inside that lake bed, probably some attempt to bring water to keep the dust from going airborne. Another body of work more recently, he went to Chile in one of the highest deserts in the world where they're mining, a copper mine, Atacama Desert. And here's kind of a time lapse. I'll go quickly through what we are doing to the world here. Wow. And just the desolation of what copper mining has done to local towns, destroyed the water, polluted things. These are drying fields, leaching fields for chemicals, the copper chemicals to dry out. Certain amount of beauty, some painters might like these. This does look like a geometric abstract painting. And again, I'm going to zoom through these in our last 5 minutes. Mitch Dobrowner, if you've liked nothing so far, this guy is a mind blower. He is a storm chaser, and these are just impossible. But here he is out in Nebraska and out in that Hurricane Alley. I mean, as I was editing these, I'm just so much in awe of these pictures that it's otherworldly. I mean, if you were looking for proof of other beings, this is pretty convincing. But these are really straight photographs, and he'll show you just a hint of the ground. And the titles are usually a description of what, like a wave cloud above trees would be one description. I mean, just spectacular, spectacular, spectacular images. And, I'd be happy to say these are totally celebratory, unless humans are causing these to happen more often and be more destructive. But a lot of people just regard Mitch's work in awe and beauty. I mean, if I was looking for proof of God, this is probably one of the best visual proofs that I'm ever going to find. I mean, just spectacular. So, at the start of this class, I mentioned we're going to look at fine art photographers, and we're going to look at beauty and where does beauty fit in these images that are often critical of what's happening on planet Earth. But I'm happy to just look at these as nature just doing her thing in a monumentally powerful and spiritual way. Jane Fulton Alt was a social worker, worked as a Red Cross worker during Hurricane Katrina down in New Orleans, took up photography, and now she shows us what fires look like, really up close. And she has been given permission to attend burn fires, controlled burns. So there are firemen there lighting fires, very carefully. And so she's able to take these amazing pictures. Look at how spectacular this is, of just flying embers. I mean, nothing's attached to anything in this picture. Really powerful. And so, again, there's so much to talk about, and essays have been written beautifully. You can still buy the catalog from this CPA show with great essays. And since this is a controlled burn, it's not really evidence of a massive forest fire, but it does allow us to, get inside of a forest fire and be awed by either beauty or horror of crackling tree limbs. And let's cool off a little bit here with Camille Seaman, whose dad was Native American, whose dad was Native American and mother was African American. And she has been traveling to both poles, the Arctic and also Antarctica, to capture something that's rapidly disappearing. And I mentioned her in our brief course description, Camille Seaman and her rapidly disappearing icebergs, but they're so beautiful. And she says that her Native American dad would take her out into the woods and have her look at trees and see them as beings, as living beings, as living people. And she regards these icebergs as individual entities. I mean, no two icebergs are alike. These things are born and they're dying all too quickly. But these are huge photographs, also 6 feet wide. She's a TED speaker and a Stanford fellow, and has won all kinds of awards based on the relevance of these photographs. Another picture of her shooting digitally. Very powerful. And again, she's won awards because not only is this about melting icebergs, but it's all about the rise of sea level. And you want to start a conversation, much of New York City is in a very bad place, if there is such a thing as sea level rise. Same with Florida, as we are seeing. But I wanted to get here in our last 2 minutes because I'm depressed. I don't know about you, but I'm going to end both of our classes with something celebratory. Let's take a look at an artist who works in the landscape in nothing but a positive way. Andy Goldsworthy. You got to love this guy. Working with natural materials. Many of you, all of you know Andy Goldsworthy, but I just wanted to let us have a gentle landing today after hurricanes and fires and ice caps melting. Here's a guy using only natural ingredients. If he's going to make a sculpture out in the wild, he'll use thorns as his way to secure things. He's not going to use duct tape or nails or glue guns. So here he is using thorns to create this incredible, very temporal sculpture. And here he is, the wind has come up and he's about to lose all his work. He's trying to steady what he's done. There are several books out on Andy Goldsworthy's beautiful images. One of my favorite art museums in the world is right near a winery. It's up in Napa. Some of you, if I could see all your faces, I'd ask for a show of hands of the lucky people who've walked into this Hess art collection up in Napa for free and stood in front of incredible things, and there's really nobody ever there. This is one of their own pictures with a model in front of the Andy Goldsworthy piece, but this is what you can go and visit, a permanent Andy Goldsworthy sculpture in the Hess collection. And you can take a close look. These are little thorns attaching each of these little twigs together. And you know me, admit it, you do the same thing. You just touch it. And someone said they had an earthquake up there and a lot of things fell off shelves, but this piece, as fragile as it was unharmed by the earth moving. But anyway, just want to wind it down with some magical pictures. What a smart idea to build half of a stick sculpture in a lake, knowing that the bottom half will be taken care of by the reflection. Putting little berries, creating a beautiful little sculpture until the fish came and ate all the berries. But his work is about temporality. And so that's why I'm showing you his work, because the only way we see this is because he took a picture of his sculpture that only lasted a day or an hour. To make this ice sculpture, he'd break off icicles, spit on them with this 98-degree saliva, and quickly attach it, and then his saliva would be frozen, and there's your glue. Just impossible things. This is one patient guy. I mean, you've got to be kidding me, Andy. When you see him work, he's got tape all over his fingers, Band-Aids and surgical tape. His hands are just ruined, but very temporal, beautiful things. Look how he lays himself down in a snowfall for 15 minutes, and gets up. Take a picture quickly. For your homework tonight, you must rent winning documentary of just watching this guy work, doing his art in the field. Rivers and Tides. I'm sure many of you have seen this fantastic film that you can rent with his beautiful Scottish accent, telling you why he does the things he does. And he gets grants. He gets to go places and build huge sculptures. He went to the North Pole to build this sculpture. Here's a huge undertaking that he did along highways with friends. And I'll just end it closer to home. This is at Stanford University commissioned him to do this. This is supposed to be a winding river. To me, it looks so much like a snake, but he was able to get access to old stones that Stanford did not use building Stanford back in the 1800s. These are old building stones in a quarry that weren't needed to build the university, but they still exist. So Goldsworthy rounded up a lot of grad students at Stanford and undergrads and had them help build this. This is my son ruining public artwork here. But it's pretty amazing. It just fades into the ground. I see it so much as a serpent, but this is Stone River back in 2001.